I still remember the night I first heard this tale. The wind howled through the village, the fire crackled, and my grandmother leaned in close and whispered, "Let me tell you about the girl who married a ghost." My heart skipped a beat. And now I'll tell you that same story, just as I heard it, just as it chilled me to the bone. But stay with me till the end, because what happened to her could happen to anyone who forgets the rules of the spirit world. Asterisk the strange. Visitor in the forest. How I first heard the tale. I was no older than 10 the first time I heard the story. The moon was a pale silver coin hanging above our village, and the wind whispered through the palm trees like it carried messages from the ancestors themselves. My cousins and I had gathered around the fire, the wood crackling beneath a pot of simmering groundnut stew. The air was thick with the scent of roasted maize and earth after rain. That was the night my grandmother decided to tell us a story, not one of those light-hearted ones with talking animals or clever tortoises. No, that night, she told us a tale that would stay with me forever. She had a way of drawing us in. Her voice dipped low like the river in drought, then rose high like a bird startled from a tree. Her eyes sparkled with secrets only the old ones knew, and she always began the same way. "Listen closely, children, for this is not a tale for the faint-hearted. This is the story of the girl who married a ghost." I remember leaning forward, heart pounding. Even then, I knew this wasn't just a story. There was a heaviness in her tone that said, "This happened. Maybe not here, maybe not now. But it happened." She said she'd heard it from her own grandmother when she was just a girl herself. That's how stories live in our village, not in books, but in the mouths of elders, passed down like heirlooms, worn smooth by time and memory. That night, the firelight danced on our faces as the shadows crept closer, and the forest, which usually hummed with insects and laughter, had gone strangely quiet. I swear I even heard the hoot of an owl, and in our tradition, owls don't just hoot for no reason. They are messengers, Dot. As she began, I found myself clutching my cousin's hand, though I'd never admit it. My grandmother's voice was like a spell. There once was a girl so beautiful, the rivers bent their banks to flow closer to her feet. But beauty, my children, is a powerful thing. And like fire, it can warm or it can burn. She spoke of a village not unlike ours, where the trees were tall and the elders sat beneath them chewing kola nuts. A village where women carried pots on their heads with grace and children ran barefoot in the red earth. The girl lived there, right at the edge of the forest, the kind of place where the human world and the spirit world brush shoulders when no one is looking. I remember asking, "Was this in our village?" And my grandmother only smiled that knowing smile of hers and said, "It could be anywhere. That's what makes the story true." She continued, painting the picture with words like an artist with a brush. She described how the girl's laughter sounded like wind chimes and how suitors came from near and far to ask for her hand. But she refused them all. She said she was waiting for someone special, my grandmother said. Someone who would come not with gold or goats, but with something else. That part always stuck with me, because I knew then that kind of longing, that kind of dream, is how the spirits find you. The fire crackled louder, almost like it was listening too. And then my grandmother told us how one day, after walking through the forest to fetch water, the girl returned different. Her eyes were distant, and she said she had met someone. I remember my cousin whispering, "Was he a ghost already?" And my grandmother gave her a look that made the hairs on my neck stand. She didn't know it yet, she said. None of them did. At this point in the story, my grandmother leaned in so close I could smell the hibiscus oil in her hair. She said, "Be careful who you meet in the forest. Not everyone you see there belongs to this world." That night, I didn't sleep easily. I kept thinking of the girl, her face unknown but real in my mind, and of the man with no shadow who would come for her. I thought of the forest just beyond our home and wondered if it too held secrets, if it too had seen a ghost walk its paths under the cover of dusk. Years passed, but that story never left me. In fact, the older I got, the more I understood the layers in her tale, how it wasn't just about spirits and hauntings. It was about choices, about being seen and wanting more, and how sometimes what you long for comes dressed in the finest cloth, hiding a hollow underneath. And now, as I sit before the camera, I can still hear my grandmother's voice, the way it trembled at the end of the tale. I know it's my turn to share it just like she did, because the spirits don't like to be forgotten, and if this story fades, who knows? The girl may find her way back, looking for someone to listen to, so come close. Let me tell you everything from the beginning. Her beauty was her curse. Who the girl was, they say her name was Asena, though in some versions the name changes. But I remember my grandmother calling her Asena, and that's how I've always remembered her. She lived in a small hut at the edge of her village, right where the last row of calabash trees gave way to the thick forest. She was an only child, born to an aging couple who had prayed for years to the ancestors to bless them. And when she came, she was everything they had, hoped for bright, healthy, and beautiful beyond compare. Even when she was a child, people whispered about her. That girl was born with a light in her bones, my grandmother said once, like the moon lived inside her. Her skin glowed like river clay at sunset, and her hair was dark and thick like the forest canopy. But it wasn't just her looks that held people's attention. It was the way she moved, how she listened when the elders spoke, how her voice softened when speaking to children and animals. She had the heart of a healer and the grace of a queen, but beauty, real beauty, is dangerous when it shines too brightly. My grandmother always said, the spirit world watches just like we do, and sometimes they want what we have. Asena reached womanhood, and the suitors began to arrive. Farmers, hunters, the sons of chiefs, all came bearing gifts. Some brought goats, others brought fine cloth, and a few even offered land. But Asena smiled gently and turned them all away. I will marry, she said, but not just anyone. My heart will know when the right one comes. Some called her proud. Others whispered she was cursed. But I think, and my grandmother agreed, that Asena had a longing in her that the village could not satisfy. She looked beyond the horizon with eyes that searched for something deeper. She didn't want just a husband, she wanted a mystery, a fire, a story of her own. And that, my grandmother said, is what made her vulnerable. You see, in our culture, when a girl refuses too many suitors, people begin to worry. Not just because of her age, but because the line between the world of the living and the world of spirits is thin, especially for the dreamers, the wanderers, the ones who sleep beneath moonlight, asking questions no one dares answer. Asena was just that kind of girl. She loved the forest. She would disappear for hours into the trees, returning with herbs, feathers, wild honey, and always a faraway look in her eyes. Her mother scolded her gently, the forest is not for girls who are ready for marriage, but Asena only smiled. The trees speak to me, she said. They are not afraid of me, and I am not afraid of them. And that was when the dreams began. This part of the tale, my grandmother told in a whisper. She said that Asena began to speak of a man she saw in her sleep. A tall man with eyes like storm clouds and a voice like drums in the distance. He called her by name. He stood beneath a tree that bled sap like tears and told her that he had been watching her, waiting for her. Now, in our culture, dreams are not just dreams. They are bridges. Sometimes they are warnings. Other times they are invitations. At first, Asena thought little of them. But the dreams came night after night, and then one day, while returning from the stream with her pot balanced perfectly on her head, she met a man on the forest path. He was just as she had seen him in her sleep, tall, strong, handsome. His skin was pale, not like a sick man's, but like moonlight made flesh. His clothes were fine but old, as though woven in another time. And most strange of all, he left no footprints in the red earth. But Asena, dreamer that she was, didn't notice. Or maybe she chose not to. Maybe her longing had grown so deep that she saw what she wanted to see. He spoke with words like poetry, and his smile was gentle. He told her he had been searching for her, that he was not from any nearby village, but from across the river in a place few had heard of. His name? That part is never the same in the story. Some call him Kumo, others say Adenji. But his name is not what matters, it is what he was. The villagers were suspicious. He came out of nowhere, and no one knew his people. But Asena, full of longing and fire, stood firm. "This is the man I saw in my dreams," she said. "He is the one meant for me." And so the elders gave their reluctant blessing. A quiet ceremony was held. No family came from the groom's side, but he explained it away with a charming laugh. "They live far," he said. "They are spirits of the old ways. They do not travel easily." Everyone laughed, though the air was heavy. My grandmother said that the day of the wedding, the birds didn't sing, the dogs didn't bark, and one old woman, blind and half mad, cried in the market, "A spirit walks among us, and we have dressed him in cloth." But no one listened, and so Asena left her parents' home and followed the man into the deeper part of the forest, past the trees she knew, past the places even the hunters did not go. She said she was going to her husband's compound, but no one ever saw her again. My grandmother paused there every time she told the story, letting the silence settle like dust. "She went with love in her heart," she said, "but love is not always enough when the one who loves you does not belong to this world." It's easy, isn't it, to think we are wiser than our ancestors, to believe that we would know better, that we would see the signs. But when the heart yearns deeply, it opens doors, and not all of them lead to safe places. Asena was beautiful, too beautiful, perhaps. But it was her longing, that deep, untamed desire for more, that called the ghost to her, and he came. Because spirits, too, are drawn to beauty, especially the kind that lives in the soul. A man with no shadow, the mysterious Suitor. It was not until the third night after the wedding that my grandmother said. Asena began to notice it, the absence of a shadow. That's what she told us. Her voice dropping to a hush as if the trees themselves might be listening. "A man who casts no shadow," she whispered, "is either a god or something far older and darker." When Asena left her village, the people tried to carry on as if all was normal. Her parents wept quietly but didn't dare speak against her choice. The elders had already blessed the union, and to question it would be to challenge the old ways. Still the villagers whispered. Children were told to stay away from the forest path, and old women tightened the charms on their doors. The girl? She had no fear. My grandmother said Asena was led deep into the forest by her new husband, deeper than anyone from her village had ever gone. For days they walked. When she grew tired, he lifted her gently, and she swore she felt no bones beneath. His skin, only cold air, like mist wrapped in cloth. Still, she felt safe, enchanted. That's the word my grandmother used, enchanted. The spirit world doesn't always come with shrieks and screams. Sometimes it comes with flowers and songs and soft-spoken promises. They finally reached his home, not a house built from wood or clay, but a compound made of silence and shadows, walls of fog, roofs that never caught the sun. A place that didn't exist on any map, There were other people there, my grandmother said, but they didn't speak. They didn't blink. They moved like smoke. When Asena asked who they were, he only said, my family. They are shy. Now this part, this is where the chill set into the tale. Even as a child, I could feel it. Asena noticed that in the light of the moon, his face blurred slightly, like she was looking through moving water. His hands were always cold. He never ate, though food was placed before him. And at night, when she lit a lamp, he never cast a shadow on the wall, but love, or something that felt like it, held her back from asking questions. She told herself it was just the forest, just her imagination. She even laughed when he stood in the doorway one evening and the firelight passed right through him. She said, you stand so still, you vanish, and he only smiled. Still, the signs grew louder. There was no scent to him. Not sweat, not earth, not even smoke from the fire. His clothes never got dirty. And animals, even the bravest ones, would not come near him. Dogs howled. Birds fled from the trees. Even the ants avoided stepping on his shadowless feet. And worst of all, he never slept. Every night, she would lie down, and he would sit beside her, watching. She asked if he wasn't tired, and he replied, I have not slept in many lifetimes. My grandmother paused there, always letting us sit in the thick silence. She knew how to let fear settle like dust on her skin. It was on the 7th day that Asena broke. She went to the stream, one she had found hidden beneath a curtain of vines. She looked at her reflection in the water, her eyes darker than before. Her skin paler, like the forest was draining her life a little each day. She whispered into the water, what have I done? And the stream answered, not with words, but with the face of her husband suddenly appearing beside her in the reflection. Though when she turned, he was nowhere near. That night, she tried to leave. She told him she missed her parents. She wanted to visit the village just for a day, but he said no. Not angrily, no, never angry, but with a soft, hollow tone. You belong here now with me? She waited until he was out gathering something. She never knew what, only that. He vanished for hours, and then she ran. But the forest had changed. What once took hours now felt like days. The paths twisted. Trees stood where they hadn't before. Roots grabbed at her ankles like fingers. The sun refused to rise. It was like she was running through a dream or a trap, and then she saw him standing in front of her. Not running, not chasing, just standing. His smile was no longer soft. His eyes had gone from storm cloud gray to the black of a moonless sky. You cannot leave, he said. You made vows. That's when she finally asked, trembling, what? Are you? He did not lie. The spirits rarely do. I am one who loved once and lost. I searched through time, through death, through the veil that separates your world from mine, until I found you. He stepped forward, and with each step, the ground beneath him withered. I took a form you would love. I came in your dreams so you would know me. And now that I have you, I will not let go. My grandmother always said this was the moment that separated a tale from a warning. This is why we do not long too loudly, she told us. Because something is always listening. Asena dropped to her knees and wept. She begged. She screamed. But there was no one to hear her in that part of the forest. No one but the spirits, yet something, perhaps the ancestors, perhaps the gods, had mercy. A single ray of dawn light pierced the trees, striking her directly, and the spirit, the man, recoiled as if burned. His body shimmered and flickered, and for a brief moment she saw him as he truly was, not a man. Not anymore. Bones held together by grief, eyes hollow with centuries of sorrow. A creature of memory and shadow, she ran. And this time, the forest parted, the path straightened. The trees guided her home, When she burst into the village, barefoot and wild-eyed, her mother fainted. The elders came running, and she told them everything. Some wept, some prayed. Some refused to believe it, but one old woman, the same blind seer who had warned them at the wedding, nodded and said, "He will come again. Spirits do not give up what they have claimed." And that, my grandmother said, was the true beginning of Asena's curse. The spirit realm unfolds, what she discovered after marriage. After that night, the night Asena returned from the forest, torn and trembling, with the ghost's vows still echoing in her ears, nothing was ever the same again, I remember. My grandmother's voice trembling a little whenever she reached this part of the story. Her usual confidence softened into something more careful, more reverent, as if the very act of remembering what happened next risked inviting it back. Into the present, Asena returned home, she said, but she never truly came back. For weeks she did not speak, she barely ate. The life in her, the light that once danced in her eyes, had dimmed to a flicker. She kept glancing over her shoulder, flinching at shadows, listening for sounds no one else could hear, and she stopped sleeping. She said that every time she closed her eyes, he came to her, the ghost husband. He stood at the foot of her bed, whispering her name, "Asena, you are mine." Sometimes she'd wake up with mud on her feet or leaves in her hair, as though she'd walked in her sleep, or been pulled halfway back into the forest. The village tried to protect her. The elders gathered, charms were tied to every door, ashes were drawn in circles. A goat was sacrificed and the blood sprinkled in front of her hut. The local diviner was called, a thin, trembling man with eyes like stormy water. He examined her, consulted the bones, listened to the winds, and finally said, "She has crossed the threshold. One foot remains in our world, the other is in his." This, he explained, was no ordinary spirit. He was an eater of time, a forgotten being, who had lived beyond death for so long that he had lost his name. He had been a man once, a lover, a husband, maybe even a father, but grief had hollowed him out, and his soul had refused to rest. Spirits like that, the diviner said, do not seek vengeance. They seek companionship, but not the kind we understand. They bind through dreams, they trap through love, and they cling to the living until both are ghosts. Asena listened to all this in silence. And then one day she spoke, "I must go back." Her parents protested, the elders shouted, but she remained calm, eerily calm, and said, "He will not stop. He waits at the edge of sleep. If I do not face him in his world, he will drag me there in mine." So preparations began. My grandmother described that night as unlike any other in her lifetime. The entire village gathered, forming a circle at the edge of the forest. Asena stood in the center, wrapped in white cloth, with chalk drawn on her forehead and wrists. Her hair was braided with cowries and herbs. Around her, the drummers played rhythms older than memory, rhythms said to open paths between worlds. The diviner stood beside her, murmuring prayers in a tongue no longer spoken by the living. Then, silence. Asena stepped into the forest. She disappeared for 3 days. No one saw her. No one followed. It was forbiddance. Even the diviner said, if she does not return by the third sunrise, she belongs to them. But return she did, and when she did, she carried knowledge not meant for the living. Her skin was darker, her eyes deeper, like wells that had seen beyond the bottom. She moved like someone hearing music no one else could. And when she spoke, her voice echoed just a little, as if the forest still clung to her words. She gathered the elders and told them what she saw. She had crossed into the spirit realm, not fully, but enough. She had walked through forests that grew upside down, where trees wept blood and the wind sang lullabies in forgotten dialects. She had entered a compound where the buildings whispered and the ground pulsed like a heartbeat, And there, in the center, was him, her ghost husband, no longer hiding his true form. He was tall and skeletal, draped in the clothes of centuries past. His face was not flesh, but memory, shifting and flickering, sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes nothing at all. His voice was made of thunder wrapped in silk dot. He welcomed her. He asked her to stay, but she refused. And in doing so, she did something no one expected. She offered him a choice. You can keep chasing shadows, she told him, dragging the living into your grave, or you can let go. You can return to the ancestors and be received as one of them. He laughed at first. But when she sang, a song taught to her by her grandmother, one only sung at the deathbeds of kings, he listened. Said the spirits gathered around her then. Ancestors, forgotten gods, echoes of lost children. All watching, all waiting, and when she sang the final note, he wept out that was the end, or so she thought. He vanished. The trees released her, the forest opened, and she walked back into the human world, changed but alive. The village celebrated. Drums were played, fires were lit, but my grandmother always told us, peace never lasts long when the spirit world is involved. Because though the ghosts let her go, something stayed inside her. She began to speak to things no one could see. She predicted rains and sickness and births with terrifying accuracy. Birds followed her. Fireflies danced in her presence. And her eyes, those deep, deep eyes, never lost their distant shine. The elders called her half woman, half whisper. She became a healer, a seer. Some feared her, others worshipped her. But no one ever dared love her again. And she never married. She said she had already been claimed once, and once was enough. Eventually, she left. Just walked into the forest one morning and didn't return. Some say she was called back. Others say she went to help another soul caught in the ghost's trap. But my grandmother, she said Asena simply became part of the forest, a protector of those who dream too deeply, a warning to those who chase the unknown, a shadow that walks beside every girl who longs for love without knowing what it might cost. And that is where her story ends, or begins, depending on who you ask. The price of love and secrets. What happened after I was older when I finally understood what my grandmother meant by some stories are doors. Back when I was a child, I thought she just meant it was a powerful tale, the kind that makes your skin tingle and your eyes widen. But later, as I sat beneath the same moon that had watched over Asena, I realized what she had truly meant. Her story, the story of the girl who married a ghost, was not just a memory. It was a warning, a lesson, a map for the soul. I used to ask my grandmother, did it really happen? And she would say, does it matter? Then she would lean closer and add, you believe it, don't you? That's how spirits live, in belief. Asena never returned from the forest the second time, but her presence never left the village. People claimed they saw her in dreams. Others heard her voice in the wind when the trees shook too hard. One woman swore that Asena guided her out of the forest when she was lost during a storm, her pale hand pointing the way home before vanishing into mist. There's a term in our language for someone like that, Nkoyo, a soul that has moved beyond death, but not into darkness. A soul that walks between worlds, protecting the balance. And that's what Asena became. She had paid the price, not just for love, though that was part of it, but for longing, for reaching into a place where humans are not meant to go. And yet, she didn't fall. She transformed. The elders began to speak of her with reverence. They said her story should only be told under moonlight, and only by those who understood its weight. My grandmother said it wasn't just about a ghostly marriage. No, she said, it was about choice. About what happens when we open our hearts so wide that even the spirits find a way in. And perhaps it was also about healing, not just for the living, but for the dead. Because if what Asena said was true, and the ghost had once been a man, full of grief, then perhaps her presence, her voice, her courage gave him something he hadn't had in centuries: peace. I often wonder what happened to him. That ancient spirit who waited so long, loved so fiercely, and lost once more. Did he finally pass on? Did he fade into the land of the ancestors, or return to the shadows, quieter than before? Some believe his spirit still wanders, but now it no longer seeks to bind. It simply watches, regrets, waits. Others say he visits Asena from time to time, and they walk the forest together in silence, no longer as husband and wife, but as echoes of what was and what could never be. But this is not just a story about them, Dot. It is a story about us, about how we love, how we fear, and how we speak to the unseen. It is a tale that reminds us that beauty, longing, and loneliness are powerful forces. And when they stir too deeply within us, they open gates. Dot. It also reminds us that not all love is good, and not all love is bad. Some loves come to teach, others come to warn, and some, like the one Asena found, come to unearth the parts of ourselves that sleep in shadow. I remember once asking my grandmother, would you have gone with him if he came to you like that? She gave me a long, measured look and then smiled. We all would, child, she said. That's what makes the story dangerous. And she was right. Because when I tell this story now, to friends, to children, to strangers under starlit skies, I see it in their faces. That glimmer of wonder, that ache, that secret thought, would I have followed the ghost too? That's the power of the tale, and that's why it must be told carefully. Dot. In my own life, I have felt the forest pull. I have stood at its edge, listening for whispers, and sometimes, only sometimes, I think I hear Asena, her voice, soft and distant, like wind through the leaves. Be careful what you wish for, be careful who you follow, and never forget, not everything that smiles at you is alive. So if you ever find yourself walking alone beneath the trees and a handsome stranger with no shadow steps into your path, remember Asena, remember her price, and walk away, or don't. But know that stories like hers don't end. They loop, they echo, they wait in the dark for another heart to open. That's why I told you this tale, not just to entertain you, not just to thrill you, but to protect you, because the spirit world listens when we speak its name. And now that you've heard the story, you've been seen, close your windows tonight, say your prayers, and dream softly, because the Asena may be gone, but the ghost, he remembers.